After about 13 years of speculation, a BioShock movie has been announced and is being worked on by Netflix no less. Though it's no surprise given the amount of video game adaptations being worked on at the moment, with the Cuphead, Resident Evil, Tomb Raider and Splinter Cell series also coming to Netflix respectively. So the industry has gone video game adaptation mad, but like I mentioned, those are all shows, hence why I found the reason to create a BioShock movie rather odd. For me, if you manage to obtain a video game license to create a form of media, being a movie or TV show, it should always be a show. Most video games stories are at least 8 hours in length, and most movies daren't cross the 3-hour mark, but with a show you have so much more time to flesh out characters and storylines. Netflix have proven in the past that they can make competent shows based off video games when they publish the likes of Arcane and Castlevania. They also published Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, but the least said about that the better. But when taking all this into account, why a BioShock movie? I mean, it could work if they create an entirely different storyline, which I guess is something I'd like to see, because I don't really want to see a rehash of BioShock 1 or something. Each game has an incredible story, and to me it's one of the best video game trilogies ever made, though according to speculation and some pretty reliable sources, it's set to be a quadrilogy, with a fourth game reportedly being set during the 1960s in a fictional Antarctic city. So we're getting quite a bit of BioShock content for the first time in 9 years. But right now we have to play the waiting game and examine the constant question of which is the best BioShock game. Now I've seen some pretty bold opinions when it comes to this, but believe me when I say I may genuinely have the most controversial ranking of the games on the internet. I love each and every one of these games, they're all fantastic in their own right and all have great stories. Will Netflix adapt one of these into the movie? I doubt it, but you never know, they may do one. So now, let's discuss the brilliance and genius of each narrative that the BioShock games have to offer, and you can decide for yourself whether I'm deluded or spitting facts. Spoiler warning ahead for the BioShock trilogy. There's no doubting that the BioShock trilogy is masterful. Each game innovates in such unique ways while following the same storyline, yet they manage to branch out into their own separate paths. One more so than the others, but I'm about to say something so controversial yet so brave. The worst BioShock game is the first one.
You what?
Oh boy, I'm gonna get the dislikes for this one. Yes, one of the most influential and game-changing games ever made is the worst in the series and also has the worst story to offer.
What's that ominous glow in the distance?
But just hear me out. By worst, I mean least best, because I could not praise the first game enough. Playing through BioShock is a fantastic experience. The combat is balanced and rewarding, where when you die you do feel like it's your fault, but when you manage to kill a boss you feel like a badass. The plasmids make the gameplay fun as fuck, and the environments... The different locations and environments are some of my favourite in gaming. They feel so alive yet so dead at the same time. They work so well with the game's setting and story as well. And speaking of the story, oh boy, it's a special one. After a plane crashes in the Atlantic Ocean, a man named Jack emerges from the ruin and swims to a lighthouse where he is greeted by this. Lovely. There he discovers the underwater city of Rapture, built by businessman Andrew Ryan. The city was intended to be an isolated utopia heaven, but the discovery of Adam put the city on its ass. The material itself can grant super abilities in humans such as electrobolts, incinerate and telekinesis, and a certain group become obsessed. These become known as the Splicers. Adam is very addictive and threw the city in chaos. Part of the chaos was created by a smuggler by the name of Frank Fontaine. He saw what Ryan had created and wanted it for himself, but Fontaine went missing when Rapture plunged into darkness. Back to the game, you also encounter little sisters, originally named Gatherers, who are genetically altered young girls whose purpose is to reclaim Adam from corpses around Rapture. They are usually, if not always, accompanied by a Big Daddy, a genetically enhanced human who has had their skin and organs grafted into an armoured diving suit, with their purpose to protect the little sisters. The first encounter with the Big Daddy frankly shits you up, pardon my French, and sets the game up to be an action horror FPS. I honestly dread to think what those guys look like underneath. There aren't many scary moments in BioShock, if any, but there are a few that certainly unsettle you. So as explained, the city of Rapture has collapsed and you have just found yourself trapped here. You wake up with a little sister ready to harvest you with a Big Daddy watching out for potential threats.
Look, Mr. Bubbles, it's an angel!
The first man you talk to is an Irishman named Atlas.
I don't know how you survived that plane crash, but I've never been one to question Providence. I'm Atlas.
He helps you via the service radio found in the submarine vessel. Andrew Ryan, however, believes you to be an agent of the Surface Nation, and he uses the automated systems and splices against you. Atlas tells Jack that the only way he can survive is to use the abilities granted by the plasmids. He also informs us that we must be ready to kill the Little Sisters to get more Adam. Just after this, we cross paths with Dr. Tenenbaum, who urges us to instead save the Little Sisters, turn them back to normal and have a heart basically, and it creates this interesting conflict inside of you. Do you kill the now little monster who stabbed corpses so you can have much cooler abilities and have a better chance of surviving, or do you be the hero and allow these poor things to be human and have a life again, albeit at the cost of you getting much less Adam? This is the first time morality is presented to you as a theme in BioShock, and trust me, it won't be the last. Atlas claims that his wife and child have been hiding on a submarine and directs Jack towards it. Just as Jack and Atlas reach the bay where it is located, Ryan destroys it. An enraged Atlas guides Jack on a mission to kindly kill Ryan.
We'll find the bastard. We'll find him and we'll tear his heart out.
Now, one of the main reasons I believe this to be the weakest out of the 3 games is because from now until the meeting with Ryan at the end, there isn't much to write home about. However, the meeting with Sander Cohen is an exception. Sander Cohen is, or was, a poet, composer, sculptor and playwriting ruling over Fraught. Cohen becomes a leading figure in Rapture's art community, but following the descent of Rapture into madness, he also went mad, and lost his empathy and became sadistically impassive to the deaths and suffering of others. And when you meet him, it's pretty clear that he's batshit crazy. When Jack first arrives in Fraught, Cohen cuts off his radio contact with Andrew Ryan and Atlas, stranding him. Cohen then toys with Jack, inviting him to Fleet Hall to see a performance. This turns out to be the final performance of Carl Fitzpatrick, who is plastered to a piano rigged with explosives.
You sick fuck, let me out of there!
After the piano explodes, killing Fitzpatrick in the process, Cohen requires Jack to take his photo and place it in his quad tech, a masterpiece that he says people will remember him by when he's gone. Cohen then sends Jack to Poseidon Plaza, promising to let Jack take the bathysphere to Ryan only after he has killed and photographed his remaining 3 disciples, placing each photo in the quad tech. It's honestly sick, and one of the few times I've been genuinely disturbed playing a video game, having to perform these despicable acts just for my survival. Now, one of my favourite scenes in gaming history occurs next. Once the 3rd photo is placed in the quad tech, Cohen has a paranoid moment, accusing Jack of being a doubter and sends some splicers to kill him with the lights dimmed and the spotlight on Jack with Waltz of the Flowers playing. But Jack fights them off long enough for Cohen to calm down.
It is accomplished.
What an incredible scene this is. After the player completes the quad tech, Cohen finally reveals himself among a host of spotlights and confetti descending the stairs in the atrium of Fraught to congratulate Jack on his work. Cohen then rewards Jack by opening one of the glass cases near the stage. At this moment, you can either kill Cohen or just move on, it's entirely up to you. Like I've mentioned, there isn't too much to mention up until we meet Ryan, so let's talk about that. If you've played BioShock before, then you'll know that throughout the game, whenever Atlas has asked you to do a task or whatever, most often than not, he has ended the sentence with, "Would you kindly?"
Head on back to Fontaine Fisheries when you're ready, would you kindly? Would you kindly leg it over to the sphere and get on down to Hephaestus? Now, would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Something that realistically you pick up on but never really think anything of. That is, until you enter this room. This is the moment where you realise that something is very wrong. You confront Ryan in his office where he is casually playing golf, but Ryan then reveals the truth that he pieced together. Jack was actually born in Rapture a mere 4 years ago, genetically modified to mature rapidly. He is Ryan's illegitimate son by an affair with an exotic dancer called Jasmine Jolene. Ryan further reveals that after purchasing Jack's embryo, Frank Fontaine designed him to obey his orders that are preceded by the following phrase,
"Would you kindly?" Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Jack was then sent to the surface when the Rapture Civil War started to put him beyond Ryan's reach. When the conflict between Fontaine and Ryan reached a stalemate, Jack was sent instructions to board a flight with a package and use its contents, being a revolver, to hijack and crash a plane near the lighthouse, enabling him to return to Rapture as a tool of Fontaine. Because Jack was Ryan's son, he could freely use Ryan's bathysphere network, which had been locked out to everyone else except those within the Ryan's genetic ballpark, as it were. Ryan then bangs on about pride and how a man chooses, a slave obeys. What a quote, by the way. Finally, Ryan orders Jack to kill him.
Kill! Man chooses!
With Ryan's death, Jack realises too late that Atlas has been using said trigger phrase to control him. Atlas reveals himself to be Frank Fontaine, who faked his death to throw Ryan off his trail and can take control of the city, leaving Jack at the mercy of the reactivated security systems. Now, I don't rate BioShock highly as everyone else does, but even I can recognise that that scene is one of the best in gaming history. The whole storytelling behind that is just phenomenal. Not to say that the twist of Atlas being the villain all along is that breathtaking, because it's something that you, or maybe just me, kinda saw coming at one point, but just the way they tie everything together is unreal. I've seen some people with the issue of the fact regarding that Andrew Ryan ordered his own son to kill him instead of, say, Atlas, and I honestly see it more of a Ryan would rather die than see his own son become a controlled slave, and the quote of a man chooses, a slave obeys kind of backs that up. Dr. Tenenbaum and her little sisters help Jack escape through the vent system, where he falls unconscious. When Jack wakes up, Tenenbaum has deactivated some of his conditioned responses, such as the trigger phrase itself, and assisting him in breaking the remaining ones. Among them, one that would have stopped his heart. With the help of the little sisters, Jack is able to track down Fontaine. The mob boss, having been cornered, injects himself with a vast amount of Adden and becomes an inhuman monster, which I wasn't too big a fan of. I don't know, I just don't really think the game needed some huge monster boss fight to make it feel epic, but in saying that, I do like how it ends. Jack battles him, eventually prevailing and allowing the little sisters to pile on him and extract the Adden from his body, killing him. Love that. Now, I do love a game with multiple endings, and BioShock does not disappoint in that area. With 3 different endings depending on how you interacted with the little sisters. If the player rescued all the little sisters, therefore saving their life, the ending shows 5 little sisters returning to the surface with Jack and living their lives under his care. And it ends on a very heartwarming tone. If the player harvested and therefore killed all the little sisters, the game ends with Jack turning on the sisters after defeating Fontaine, presumably killing all of them and taking all of their Adden. Tenenbaum narrates what occurred, condemning Jack and his actions, voice thick with anger and contempt. If the player saved some of the little sisters but killed some as well, the ending is visually identical to the second one, though the tone of Tenenbaum's voice is a sad one as opposed to an angry one. If you got anything other than the good ending for your first playthrough, then you're a monster. In conclusion, BioShock is a brilliant game. As mentioned, I don't think it's quite what people make it out to be, but it definitely still holds up today. The story is easily the best part about it. It has great writing and some scenes really stand out amongst the rest, such as that scene with Andrew Ryan at the end. The dialogue in the game is some of the best I've ever seen in gaming, to be honest. Also, the setting and ambience is second to none. Like most games though, it starts off initially quite spooky, but then does lose its fear factor a bit. Apart from any encounter with a Big Daddy, those guys are terrifying. I swear I have to physically and mentally prepare myself before starting a fight with any of those big bastards, regardless of my current state. Speaking of the whole dynamic and story behind them and the little sisters, it's probably my favourite element in the game. Another huge plus I can give this game is its lack of cutscenes. This is not something that most people pick up on, but the avoidance of cutscenes means that the player is always in the moment. And when you're in those moments that are crucial to the story, this can really help immerse you, and it immersed me without me even really thinking about it. I'm not sure I'm all that keen on the whole just keep on respawning system and not losing any progress. If you don't know what I'm talking about, basically you can be fighting a boss and then if you die then, after you respawn, the said boss will keep its health. Instead of a game, say like Borderlands, where a boss will fully regenerate the health if a player is killed, making it so much more stressful and intense. It basically just means that you can kill any boss with just a decent bit of determination. You don't really need any level of strategy or technique. I don't know, maybe I'm just being picky, but it kind of stood out to me. One last point before we move on, the audio logs are masterful. Whenever I play a game with audio logs or notes, I tend to try and collect all of them to help piece together the story and add an even deeper level of lore, and they do it fantastically here. It kind of just goes to show the effort they put in. They're incredibly written and they help you piece together the lore and story behind everything. And that, kids, is BioShock.
I know you. That symbol on your hand marks you a dead man. 10 years, Subject Delta, since I watched you put a gun to your head and pull the trigger. But take heart. Out of your pain, paradise was born.
You're probably wondering how I can rate the first game the least, given the amount of praise I've just laid upon it. You especially can't see from my point of view unless you're insane, but for reasons I'm about to go through, I prefer the sequel. When it comes to gameplay and combat, it's relatively the same. However, we have some new plasmids like Scout, Decoy and Security Command, but forgetting all of that, let's just talk about the main reason I prefer this game to its predecessor, the story.
I don't know how you survived, but your suffering is over now. These men will ease your burden. Please understand that like all I have done, this is an act of love.
I can't imagine how hard it must have been to create a villain as interesting and compelling as Andrew Ryan, but I really think they pulled it off. She's truly a memorable character, and if you find some of her diaries, you actually find out how intriguing she is. This is why I love the addition of logs and diaries, for example. People never really seem to have a good criticism of her, yet they seem to criticise her a lot, if you know what I'm saying. One of those weird criticisms being her design, claiming that she should look much older given her age of pushing 60. But given all the science in Rapture, I think it's possible to maintain youth, and you can't blame her for taking advantage of that. If she continues to not look so old and maintain her image of an unscarred woman, she becomes a kind of goddess to her deformed followers, if you know what I'm saying. Lamb consistently preaches about salvation. She demands that they reject the practices of Andrew Ryan and embrace her socialist theatrical vision. Her philosophy is pretty simple. We reject the gene, we reject the self, we reject the tyrant. In other words, she demands a rejection of the world before her. She believes that self-awareness is a curse and preaches the morality of collectivism. She demands a complete rejection of the past. Unfortunately, you are one of the most powerful symbols of the past, and in order to move on, Lamb must destroy you. But more on that in a second. BioShock 2 from the very start demands a radical shift in perspective. In the first game, you are essentially an outsider who must navigate the complexities of Rapture. In 2, however, you play as one of the most iconic symbols of Rapture. You are your own former enemy, a Big Daddy, and it is awesome. To the Little Sisters, you are more than their knight in shining armour. Like, they create shrines and altars to honour you all over Rapture. Lamb, however, is going for a clean slate. As such, the game has one of the most jarring intros to a game that I've ever seen. As mentioned, you're a Big Daddy, and you basically just walk a little sister to extract the Adam from a corpse and defend her from some splicers. All is well until Sophia Lamb rocks up, informing you that the little sister is in fact her daughter and forces you to kill yourself.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
You awaken in 1968, a decade has passed. Your name is but Subject Delta. Delta begins receiving telepathic messages from Eleanor pleading for help. You encounter Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum once again. She really does become one of my favourite characters somehow. Tenenbaum tells you that in order to save Eleanor and stop Lamb, you must travel across the ruins of Rapture to Fontaine Futuristics. Just hearing that name again gave me PTSD. And speaking of, the effect the first game has on the sequel is insane, and I'll explain what I mean. You meet a businessman called Augustus Sinclair who, no matter how hard the game tried to make me, I could not trust him.
When all this is over and we're divvying up Rapture's bounty, you and I'll be holding court on a private island, son. Think of it, each world power on bended knee, holding a bouquet made of money.
I was always constantly looking over my shoulder for even the slightest suspicious statement from him to give me the hint that he was going to betray me. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. But I think you know why I thought he would. After this, you then set off and...
Oh shit.
That is the sound of a big sister. My face drops whenever I hear that noise, because the fights make me want to commit. They are definitely a worthy successor to the Big Daddies because not only are they terrifying, they kick your ass. After you scrape past your first big sister by the skin of your teeth, Delta receives aid from Eleanor, who uses her psychic connections to the new little sister to leave care packages and messages for him throughout Rapture. You find out through audio logs and, well, the story itself, that against Andrew Ryan's better judgment, Lamb was originally brought to Rapture to help those struggling to cope with life underwater. However, Lamb used therapy sessions to brainwash her patients into joining a cult she called the Rapture family. God, that's good. Lamb was confronting and defeating Ryan in public debates. In response to this new threat, Ryan asked Sinclair to deal with her. Sinclair used reporter Stanley Poole as a mole within the family to compromise Lamb, who was then arrested and sent to Rapture's prison, leaving her daughter Eleanor in the care of her trusted lieutenant and singer Grace Holloway. This was another reason I was sus of Sinclair. He worked with Ryan. Was that not good enough of a reason? When Eleanor confronted Stanley about how he bankrupted Lamb's property in her absence, Stanley panicked and sold her to one of Frank Fontaine's orphanage, which led to her transformation into a little sister. Delta then discovers Lamb's plans to use Adam to transform her daughter into a superhuman with all the knowledge of Rapture's intellectual elite. Lamb will then use the same conditioning method used on Jack to destroy Eleanor's sense of self, brainwashing her into acting only for her goals. Sinclair's agenda also becomes clear. He plans to take over Rapture from Lamb, cannibalise its technology and sell it to the surface world, and absolutely all of this is a good enough reason for me to claim that yes, BioShock 2 is better than 1.
It's true.
There's just so much more meat to unpack with the story, and none of it is filler, it all works with each other. People always say that BioShock 1's story is the best in the series, and all I have to say to that is it? I'm sorry, but it really isn't all that in comparison to the others. Anyway, you meet Grace Holloway, and it's revealed to you that you are in fact the one who ended her singing career when you broke her jaw after she attempted to approach a transformed Eleanor. You are then given the choice to either kill or spare Grace, and I'm not really sure why you would kill her. Granted, she was a bit of a dick trying to kill you and all that, but honestly, Grace is probably the only 100% good sane character you will meet in the whole BioShock series. Poole's a cowardly bastard, Ryan, Fontaine and Lamb both committed great sins for their philosophies and wants, Tenenbaum, while on a toner, has one of the nastiest backstories and only changed her ways following the Little Sister project, and even Alexander was involved in some nasty scientific exploits. Killing her would just be wrong.
You had me under a gun, yet you just walk away? No monster alive turns the other cheek. No monster does that. A thinking man does that.
The next choice you have to make follows soon after. But before this, you realise that Delta was once an ordinary man nicknamed Johnny Topside. He found Rapture whilst on a diving expedition and became somewhat of a celebrity within Rapture's walls. Andrew Ryan, however, was convinced that Johnny was a spy sent by the CIA or the KGB. Ryan had him made into a Big Daddy codenamed Subject Delta. After completing his mission, Delta is about to leave when Lamb informs him that Stanley turned him into Ryan and is responsible for his transformation into a Big Daddy. He's then given the choice of either killing or sparing the man. Whilst this one is a little bit more tempting, you have to remember that Eleanor is watching your every move, so killing a man who basically made it so you even met her in the first place probably wouldn't go down well with her. After finally making it to Fontaine Futuristics, Delta is once again halted by a man named Gilbert Alexander. I mentioned him very briefly before, you know, the scientific exploits and that. He is now deeply insane due to absorbing a massive amount of Adam. Once again, you're given the choice of ending or sparing him. Now, this is an interesting one because he borderline begged you to end his life in the tapes that you left behind. So do you leave him insane or psychotic, or perform a mercy killing? I've got to confess, even this was a tough one, though I declined his offer and left. Delta enters Persephone and finds Eleanor locked in within a chamber with Sophia Lamb. Before Delta can enter the chamber, Sophia smothers the sleeping Eleanor with a pillow. This stops her heart long enough for Delta's body to shut down and he is knocked unconscious. Again, another heart-wrenching scene and a big oh shit moment. Delta is captured by Lamb and his pair bond with Eleanor is severed, weakening his heart in the process. However, Eleanor sends a special plasmid to Delta that allows him to take control of her little sister. What a sequence this is, by the way. Seeing Rapture through the eyes of a little sister is quite the experience. Seeing corpses as actual angels, splices like posh party folk, and the world all lit up, it's easily my favourite part of the game. Eleanor reveals that she has closely been observing his actions, not only through the connection, but through her psychic connection to the new little sisters, and depending on Delta's actions throughout Rapture, She is either a spirited, light-hearted young woman who determined to win her and the other little sister's freedom, or a ruthless cynic who only thinks of her own needs and survival. Multiple endings. Love that. Following Eleanor's instructions, Delta brings her parts of her big sister armour, allowing her to free Delta and fight by his side. I love this duo, by the way. They resolve to make their escape from Rapture using Sinclair's escape pod. Lamb, upon seeing her daughter defy her, plans to set off bombs that will send them plummeting to the bottom of the sea. During their escape, Delta is forced to kill Sinclair, who had been captured by Lamb and transformed into a Big Daddy. Honestly, one of the saddest sections in BioShock history.
So long, kid. Thank you.
And it was at that moment that I realised what a bastard I was for never giving him a break. Eleanor and Delta make it to the escape pod, but a final trap set by Lamb mortally wounds Delta. Inside the flooded escape pod with her mother, Eleanor makes the choice to either kill or save Lamb, depending on the choices made by the player throughout the game. In the good ending, Eleanor will use her big sister needle to absorb Delta's Adam and coincide so they can be together forever, with Delta guiding Eleanor's actions and drives. In the bad ending, she will brutally harvest Delta's essence and Adam, heralding the birth of a monster. However, if Delta demonstrated some form of compassion throughout his journey, then Delta will have the option to stop and sacrifice his life to give Eleanor a chance at redemption. I love the fact that there are 3 different endings, and the one that stands out the most to me is the neutral one where Delta dies. To put it plainly, Delta chooses to die rather than let his darkness corrupt Eleanor. It's a heart-rendering moment for redemption for both of them. This is, in my opinion, the saddest but also the most real of the BioShock 2 endings. Obviously it's not ideal to see Eleanor heartlessly murder Lamb in cold blood, but you have to remember the amount of pain and suffering she put her through. There's a lot of endings in the BioShock games as a whole, but I believe this to be one of, if not the best one. It's cute as shit seeing Eleanor interact with her little sisters, and I love the good and pure ending, but I consider the neutral one to be canon. It's written a hell of a lot better, and it just makes sense. Delta wasn't a good man, and he wasn't supposed to be. I also like this ending the most because Eleanor is now free from control and can live a life as herself. In the good ending, for example, she is still controlled somewhat, even if it is by Delta. Something I picked up on whilst rewatching these endings was each ending itself is reflected with the sky. In the good ending, the skies are clear and the sun is shining brightly. Eleanor is ready to change the world for the better. In the bad ending, the horizon is a violent storm and bodies float up from the water. Using Delta's instincts, Eleanor has become a monster, and to me it's an ending that hurts to watch. But in this ending, the horizon has the rain easing up, the storm clouds in the air, but the sun is rising in the distance. Excuse me for going full English teacher here, but the clouds represent the darkness of Eleanor's soul, but the sunlight in the distance represents the hope and redemption. Subject Delta's sacrifice has allowed her to make the decision to move forward towards that light and find the redemption. I know full well I'm in the minority when I say this, but I much preferred BioShock 2 to the first game. For me, the story is so much more interesting, personal and heartwarming too. I seriously enjoyed my time with BioShock 2, and it's made a push to be one of my favourite stories I've ever experienced in gaming. I simply cannot fathom how so many people were left disappointed by this. Then again, personally, I prefer stories about people and characters I can get invested into, and BioShock 2 certainly delivered on that. One of the most underrated games I've ever played, and frankly I consider it to be, dare I say, a masterpiece? I flip-flop between 2 and Infinite for my favourite BioShock game, I really do, but whilst I can't understand the criticism for BioShock 2, I can understand it for Infinite. I can see why it's not everyone's cup of tea, what with the new setting and the Christopher Nolan-esque writing, but that's probably the reason I like it so much, you know, me being the Nolan fanboy that I am, but this game is one of the most mixed I've ever seen in terms of reaction by its player base, and I'm not surprised. Most BioShock fans probably wanted to see the story continued and connected to the previous ones, not a prequel with more confusing writing than Tenet, but I think articles like this are just shameful.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
Now, I've played some confusing games, some better than others, but BioShock Infinite made my head explode in a way no other game has. A About the game itself, gameplay wise for me it's the weakest in the series, but we do get some pretty awesome vigors like Devil's Kiss, which has replaced plasmids because, they didn't exist yet. But without further ado, let's get into the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts.
I'm going to try my absolute best to analyse and decipher the narrative after going through it, but believe me, that's no easy task. You play as a man named Booker DeWitt, and in 1912 you are transported by two people to a lighthouse. The two somewhat mysterious people then tell you to bring us the girl and wipe away the dead. DeWitt enters the structure, which houses a rocket silo that transports him to the flying city of Columbia. No, not that Columbia, this Columbia. After an attempt from a priest to baptise you and wash away your sins, you are then given the chance to walk around Columbia, and I just want to say, both the art style and the city itself are gorgeous, and considering I went straight into Infinite after playing BioShock 2, the shift in both colours and tone is quite staggering. Booker's presence in Columbia goes unnoticed until a policeman identifies the letters AD branded on his hand. This is a sign of the so-called false shepherd, which city leader and prophet Zachary Comstock prophesied would lead the lamb astray, that lamb being Elizabeth, a girl locked away in a tower by Zachary himself. And by this point you're thinking, this is predictable, I know where they're going with this. It's a whole generic Disney tale of man saves damsel from tower, and mate, you couldn't be more wrong. Booker then proceeds to massacre half the police force and fight his way to the Monument Island where Elizabeth is being held. You discover that Elizabeth has the ability to open tears in reality, portals to different dimensions basically. After freeing Elizabeth, her warden, the songbird, a 30-foot tall bird creature attacks and destroys the tower that she was held in. Booker and Elizabeth only just escape with their lives. The pair work towards the First Lady's aerodrome, planning to take an airship to Paris, a city Elizabeth has always wanted to see. Booker directs the ship to New York City with the intention of delivering Elizabeth to the Lutesses, the twins from the beginning. Yes, they are twins. Or are they? Elizabeth notices this, knocks him out and flees. He awakens to find the airship under the control of Daisy Fitzroy, the leader of the Vox Populi, a rebel organisation made up of primarily those of the working class, foreigners and people of colour, all of whom suffer in some way at the hands of Columbia's government and society. Fitzroy offers to return the airship if Booker recovers a shipment of weapons from the slums of Columbia. Booker rejoins Elizabeth and they venture deeper into the city, while Elizabeth uses her ability to manipulate tears to aid their journey. She also grows disturbed by physiological and psychological consequences of manipulating reality on Booker and the other citizens of Columbia. One tear leads them to a world where Booker has died and become a martyr for the Vox Populi, and the Vox are in the process of a violent revolt. It's around this time that the game begins to fuck with your head a bit, but this headfuckery is not even close to how hard it goes at the end. That universe's Fitzroy believes the Booker we know to be undermining her Booker's sacrifice, threatening to weaken the Vox Populi cause, and so turns her forces against him. Elizabeth is forced to kill Fitzroy to prevent her from executing a founder boy, the first oh shit moment, but trust me, there are many more to come. Elizabeth and Booker prepare to leave Columbia by airship. Songbird attacks and they crash back down to the city. Realising they cannot leave Columbia without stopping the songbird, Booker and Elizabeth seek the instrument to control it. While continuing their search for escape, they begin to unravel a conspiracy behind the founding of the city through tears and a spectre of Lady Comstock brought to life by Comstock using a siphon on Elizabeth. The Lutece twins, however you pronounce it, are revealed as not actual siblings, rather as being two versions of the same quantum physicist from two different dimensions, or realities. Up until this point, you only really see the twins once every so often, having their sentences intertwined with each other's, and so you assume them to be in the game purely for comic relief. But no, fuck you. They play a massive part in the story, and I cannot commend the writers enough for the Lutece twins. Rosalind, the female Lutece, is originally of this reality, whereas Robert, the male, comes from another. Comstock had taken Elizabeth from his alternate self in Robert's universe and adopted her as his daughter, groomed to be the city's future leader. He had been rendered sterile and artificially aged from his use of the tear devices while obtaining his prophecies. Comstock had the Lutece twins construct the siphon to subdue her powers, then plotted their murder, along with that of his wife, to conceal the truth about Elizabeth's origin, and blamed Lady Comstock's death on Daisy Fitzroy. However, in the process, Comstock inadvertently spread the Lutece's powers throughout the multiverse through the attempt on their lives, giving them the same powers as Elizabeth. On reaching access to Comstock House, Elizabeth is captured by Songbird and taken to the mansion. Booker follows but is drawn into the future by an elderly Elizabeth who has suffered decades of torture and brainwashing in Booker's absence. She has also inherited Comstock's causes and wages war on the world below.
Booker, are you afraid of God?
No. I'm afraid of you.
She reveals that Songbird would always stop Booker's rescue attempts in the past and implores him to stop this future from coming to pass by offering the means to control Songbird. Booker returns to the present and rescues Elizabeth. The pair pursue Comstock to his airship, and Comstock demands that Booker explain Elizabeth's past to her and why Elizabeth is missing a finger. Booker becomes enraged and drowns Comstock in his baptismal font when he begins to attack Elizabeth and blame Booker for all her hardships. Booker denies knowledge about Elizabeth's finger, but she asserts that he knows but does not remember.
And here we go.
This is where the game's narrative really goes off on one. Booker decides to destroy the siphon so Elizabeth can access her full power and learn the truth. While Songbird under their control, the pair fend off a Vox Populi attack before ordering Songbird to destroy the siphon. When the device Booker used to control Songbird is destroyed, he attempts to attack him. Elizabeth opens a tear, transporting the three of them to the underwater city of Rapture. Now this is where Infinite connects with the actual series, and for me,
it just works.
Booker and Elizabeth remain safe inside, but Songbird is transported outside in the water, and well, birdie go bye-bye. Elizabeth takes Booker to that reality's surface in Lighthouse. They travel out through the building's door to place outside space and time containing countless lighthouses and alternate versions of themselves. Elizabeth explains that they are within one of an infinite number of possibilities, both similar and drastically different due to choices that have been made. Then, she shows Booker the truth. On October 8th, 1893, Robert Lutece approached him on behalf of Comstock, requesting that he give us the girl and wipe away the debt. Remember that phrase?
Familiar phrase.
He's referring to Booker's infant daughter, Anna DeWitt, the origin of Booker's AD branding. Booker reluctantly agreed to sell Anna in order to pay his gambling debts, but soon changed his mind. He arrived too late to stop Comstock escaping to Rosalinda's universe through a tear, the closing of which severed the child's finger. It's like this very moment you realise the absolute fuckery that the game is about to lay on you. Comstock then raised Anna as Elizabeth, his daughter. Due to the severed finger, Elizabeth exists in two realities at once, her finger in Robert's reality and the rest of her body in Rosalind's. This is what gives Elizabeth the ability to open and create tears at will. Later, Robert feels guilty for his actions, convincing Rosalind to help him bring Booker to Columbia in Rosalind's reality to rescue Elizabeth. Hence the robot scene at the beginning of the game. Elizabeth explains that whatever actions Booker takes against Comstock, Comstock will still remain alive at least one of these universes. The Luteces have tried to enlist a Booker from different universes numerous times to end the cycle, but the result is always the same. The only way to break the cycle is to prevent Comstock from being created in the first place, and no, they can't travel back in time and cap him as a child, so Elizabeth transports Booker to the place where he went to be baptised and cleansed of his sins after his actions at the Battle of the Wounded Knee. Booker avoided baptism in the last moment and later fathered his daughter Anna in Robert's universe, while in Rosalind's universe he took the baptism, found religion, became Comstock, and never had children. Comstock, sterile from exposed to Lutece's technology, was aware of his identity as Booker and engineered Anna's abduction to provide him with a blood-related heir for Columbia. Booker and Elizabeth at the baptism are joined by alternate versions of Elizabeth from other universes.
Before the choice is made, before you are reborn.
And what name shall you take, my son?
He's Zachary Comstock. He's Booker DeWitt.
No. They're both.
The other Elizabeths proceed to drown Booker, preventing his baptismal choice from ever being made, and thus stopping Comstock from ever existing. One by one, the Elizabeths begin to disappear, the screen cutting to black before the original one does.
My brain hurts!
I hope that made sense. If it didn't, let's try and explain it. Despite claims otherwise, Booker DeWitt is Zachary Comstock. Therefore, the only way to prevent the creation of Columbia is to kill Booker during his transformation into Comstock. When Elizabeth becomes omniscient, the knowledge of every universe is common to her, and she realises that implications are much bigger than Comstock and Columbia. She sees that the universes in which the Booker character lives lead to the inevitable, a man builds a city, attempt to leave society behind and create a utopia, which ultimately leads to corruption, downfall and destruction, sometimes the destruction of Columbia, sometimes the destruction of a civilization by Columbia. Players of the original BioShock will recognise one of the alternate cities as Rapture. As Elizabeth puts it,
there's always a lighthouse. There's always a man. There's always a city.
Elizabeth leads Booker through several lighthouses, including one which contains Rapture, a city which existed in the first 2 BioShock games. Through use of these lighthouses, BioShock Infinite simplifies the multiverse theory. The idea that surrounds this theory is that there are an infinite number of universes which exist, based on simple or extreme adjustments which weren't made in others. This is where the infinite in BioShock Infinite comes from. There are an infinite number of BioShock universes. In BioShock Infinite's case, Comstock came into existence and created Columbia, whereas in BioShock 1 and 2, Andrew Ryan came into existence and created Rapture, if that makes sense. In BioShock Infinite, we're given 2 main universes, one in which DeWitt accepts his baptism and eventually becomes Comstock, thus leading to the creation of Columbia. The second is where DeWitt refuses the baptism, thus creating the man you play as in the game. Something I'm not sure many people picked up on is that Booker DeWitt can use a bathysphere.
Oops.
If you've been paying attention, then you'll know that only Andrew Ryan and those related to him can use one. So you just have to wonder. Now, this is probably the most controversial part of BioShock Infinite, its connection to the series, and I'm here to defend it. The connections are few and mostly not direct. The few direct connections include Fink seeing Rapture technology through a tear, turning plasmids into Vigors and Big Daddies into Handymen. Speaking of Big Daddies, for me you have 2 beings that reflect them apart from Handymen. First being Songbird, doing absolutely everything to protect Elizabeth, comparing her to a little sister here, but even though Big Daddies and Songbirds are distinctly different, one would think that they share their basic mechanics. If Big Daddies are humans who had their bodies grafted to diving suits, wouldn't this also be the case for Songbird? That idea brought me to my main question: who would be inside Songbird? Fink wouldn't just pick any person to become Songbird. My first thought was maybe Elizabeth's mother, but that can't be possible as they both existed at the same time at one point. So it really begs the question of who is Songbird? The other is Booker DeWitt, and this is probably a stretch, but if Booker isn't a relative or something closer of Andrew Ryan in the other universes, who's to say he isn't Subject Delta? When I first completed BioShock Infinite, I could not for the life of me give an opinion on it. I didn't know whether it was good or bad or what. My head was a mess, so I dug deep and I researched absolutely everything on it, and I put my brain into overdrive mode just to understand it. With the knowledge I collected, I then played it again, and I realised that this game isn't good, it's fucking brilliant and a stroke of genius. I think the main hate for this game comes from 2 main reasons. The gameplay and the writing, with the fact that no fucker understands it or its lack of efforts tied to the previous 2 games. I think I have a grasp on it now, but overall this game is written like a movie, and obviously that didn't go down well with some people, but I for one am all for that. It's one of the most confusing games I've ever played, but you know what? That's not a bad thing. My head exploded at the end, and I really do like the direction the writers took. Every character in Infinite is so fleshed out and interesting, which is frankly more than I can say for the previous 2 games. Infinite isn't just a game, it's an experience, and that is a phrase I don't use often for games. The look of it, the characters and the story, it's all so well put together. Infinite has a great narrative full of plot twists with morally based decisions and political dimension. Going in, I had to question whether Infinite could live up to the BioShock name, having discarded its signature word of Rapture, Big Daddy's Little Sisters and Hard as Nails atmosphere. On the way out, I was forced to question my sanity. I hope BioShock 4 is released soon, but then again, I doubt another BioShock game will ever create a flurry of emotions like Infinite did with me. This is because Infinite is a once-in-a-lifetime game, and as far as writing goes, it's truly special. There's also the question of burial at sea, but I think that's a story for another time. To end this video, I'd like to praise the BioShock series once more. It's one of the few video game series that actually gets better as it progresses. Up until this trilogy, the question of are video games really art was one that no one really had the answer to, until BioShock came along and capped off its trilogy with its undisputed masterpiece. A game so bewildering, most people probably don't understand the narrative, but they should, because it's not just about redemption and parenthood, it's also a fascinating and twisted study on scientific morality.
Hey, Paul!
Infinite is just a fascinating game to me. Thematically and progression-wise, BioShock Infinite is the exact opposite of the original game. The initial levels of BioShock seem to be nothing more than just an exceptionally good sci-fi horror game. But as you get deeper and start collecting more and more audio logs, the curtain peels back and the game becomes an observation into biological and genetic determinism, the practical viability of objectivism, class inequity, and how the exceptionalist attitude projected by most in the city would ultimately lead to their demise. Infinite is just one of those few games that says fuck your feelings and just dedicates itself to telling a story with a huge set of bollocks on it. It's a very different game to the first two, and I imagine the BioShock movie will focus more on them rather than Infinite, and I think I prefer it that way, even though I would personally just stop making video game adaptations altogether. Leave classic games and masterpieces alone, please, but who knows, maybe it'll be a cinematic masterpiece. After Arcane, I can't rule anything out. If you agreed with what I had to say here, or even if you didn't, then feel free to drop a comment explaining your thoughts on the BioShock Trilogy or the upcoming movies, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing, it really helps me out. And yeah, that's about all I have to say. Speak to you soon.